The good news is that polls show that 60% of Australians believe that climate change is real. The bad news? That tells us that 40% aren't convinced, and there's strong resistance to taking real action. Like the captain refusing to change course until he can hear the reef smashing through the hull, we run the risk of waiting until we're seeing effects that it's far too late to do anything about.
The sense of alarm and desperation about our inaction led renowned climate scientist James Lovelock to suggest that we may need to outright suspend democracy. Resistance to climate change action comes in two forms. The first is skepticism. Despite having been largely hijacked by self-interested parties, in this case the skepticism does have a following and perhaps just a little legitimacy, so we should be careful about dismissing skepticism outright lest we lose credibility.
The more important aspect though is the feeling of futility. You have the commuter heroically cycling through the rain to work, only to have the guy up the street splash her as he roars past in his enormous four-wheel drive. And pretty soon she's going to get sick of that. Just like the factory worker who forgoes a bargain flight, only to hear about the company executives private jetting to their golf vacations. Even those of us deeply concerned about this issue find it difficult to make the sort of radical sacrifices and changes that we believe are necessary. And if it's that difficult to make the sacrifices ourselves, how can we expect success when asking others to make them? And how do we argue that their individual sacrifice is really meaningful? But what if instead of demanding sacrifices, we were offering reward?
A carbon tax may be the best approach, but it's often deemed politically impossible because people would notice it and resent it every time they did something like pay their electricity bill or fill their tanks. But what if we could make that the overwhelmingly popular option? What if we could make that most unpopular of taxes, the petrol tax, the democratic choice of a free society? What we're proposing here, we believe, would do just that.
The average Australian uses about 2,000 litres of petrol per year. So if we were to start with a tax of $1 per litre, we could expect incredible resistance. Or could we? If we just implemented the tax, we could. The burden would fall disproportionately towards lower incomes, and might just end up reducing traffic enough that the well-off could drive even more. The way we make it popular is this. We give the money back. Not only do we give it back, but we give it back before it's even spent. At the beginning of January, you would receive a check for $500, but you would know that over the next 3 months, you could expect your petrol bill to be $500 more. At the beginning of April, you would get another check, and so on 4 times per year. If you don't change your driving habits or your petrol consumption at all, you suffer no penalty under the scheme. But if you're able to reduce your petrol consumption and thereby your carbon emissions, you will be rewarded immediately and in direct proportion to the amount that you reduce. So now, the person reducing his or her petrol consumption and carbon emissions is seeing real rewards for that, while the other person doesn't have to experience any great penalty.
That's the basic idea, which can be scaled up and expanded to other aspects of carbon emissions and fossil fuel consumption across the board. As the program is expanded, things like clean electricity, which would go untaxed, become financially appealing. The same for locally grown food, and so on, right through society and industry.
The first effect is economic. Can we possibly afford this? Well, first, consider that most will be unwilling or even unable to make radical reductions in their consumption immediately. So most of that money will flow straight back into the Treasury. We could, however, expect to start becoming more thoughtful about combining trips, to think about carpooling, and to see such simple changes as accelerating more gently away from red lights. Over time, though, it would become more significant. When looking for our next cars, we'll pay more attention to fuel economy. When relocating, we'll check out what's in walking distance. We could expect the changes to be gradual, but not so gradual that they wouldn't still have significance. In the near term, we might see a 10% reduction, costing the Treasury, say, $200 per person. But consider, about a year ago, most of us got checks for $900. We didn't have to do anything for those checks. In fact, we were just expected to blow the money fairly quickly in order to stimulate the economy. Suppose we'd use that payment for something like this. Not only would putting more money into the hands of Australians provide an economic stimulus, but, much more importantly, as we spent less on petrol, less money would be drained out of the economy, both locally and nationally. So, by that measure, we could expect the C-Change Allowance to provide significant economic benefits. Norway and Venezuela both produce oil. Venezuelans use it to have very cheap petrol, but with huge societal and economic problems in the country. Norwegians have about the highest petrol taxes in the world, choosing to use their mineral wealth to better their society. This brings us to societal effects. If alternate transportation becomes more rewarded, those who are walking, cycling, or even skateboarding are no longer soft-headed idealists and annoying obstacles on the road, but they're our neighbours and our families. From there, we can unlock a great deal of creativity about getting around. The effects on communities could be, and most likely would be, marvellous. We could reduce our consumption in ways that would actually better our lives.
Instead of punitive, this proposal makes carbon cutting rewarding. And as long as it's punitive, we believe action is going to be very slow in coming. And it shortcuts the skeptics. Even if climate change magically went away tomorrow, the C-Change Allowance would still have unimpeachable benefits.
On this issue of climate change, awareness has long since been raised, and the time for merely symbolic action has passed. Though the C-Change Allowance accomplishes both, it implements a concrete plan to start reducing carbon emissions immediately, with, if you will, increasing decreases as time goes on. A C-Change Allowance would encourage individuals to reduce their carbon footprint while ensuring that their efforts were meaningful society-wide, because everyone would be encouraged to get in on the act and rewarded for doing so. And Australia is in an excellent position to undertake it, to be a model for the world. The C-Change Allowance is about the individual, but it's also about the community, it's about the society, it's about the whole planet. Vitally, it's a path that leaves the choice and the freedom to us.
No,